your God. Our God. Amen. Hey, you guys, I'm super excited. We're super excited. We're going to have a guest speaker tonight. He's going to share with us. We're going to pray with him before after he comes up here. But he's going to be giving us some skills and some tools of how to witness when there's worldview barriers. And the greatest worldview barrier breaker is Jesus. Yeah. He broke into a worldview that, oh boy, it needed help. It needed help. And guess what? He has the power to do it. And y'all, I can just steal some of that thunder. Y'all, he still does. He still does. Amen? Freddy, why don't you come on up and we'll pray for you, man, and you can have the night. Freddy Davis. This guy's been super easy to get to know. I mean, I feel like I've known him for a long time. Just so easy to talk to. So we're going to have some time afterwards. And y'all can have some of that. Like, you know, it'll rub off on you. Because he like having Jesus with skin on. Lord, we thank you so much for what we're going to learn tonight. I thank you for Freddy and all the work that he's done behind the scenes, his bride being there with him praying. And Lord, the information that you have skilled his hands to put on those keys onto paper. And Lord, instruct the saints for the work of the gospel. So Lord, we ask you to bless tonight. Bless the words that come out of his mouth to our ears, Lord, and let it find fertile soil. In Jesus' name, amen. You may want to introduce her too.
Deborah?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Deborah, wave to everybody. This is my bride. We just had our 50th anniversary last August. I know. It's hard to believe. We got married when I was 12. Ooh, that was bad, Mike. Actually, she was my pastor's daughter, and so yeah, that explains a lot, probably. But well, what a wonderful opportunity it is to be with you guys this evening, and I really appreciate the opportunity, and I really hope that as you look at what we're going to look at tonight, that it's going to expand your mind just a little bit, because the topic of worldview is one that, you know, typically in Christian circles these days, we hear that word a lot, but it's actually not very well understood by most people. In fact, there's a whole bunch of different ways that people interpret it, and we'll look at that in just a little bit so that you can have a little bit better idea of what we're actually going to be dealing with. But before I get into this kind of deep, let me just give you a little bit about my own personal background and how I came to end up doing what I'm doing. I was very fortunate to have had the opportunity to grow up in a Christian home. My family was very faithful in church. Every time the doors were open, we were there, and so I had the opportunity to be raised in that kind of environment. When I was about 8 years old, Billy Graham actually came from Tallahassee, Florida, came to Tallahassee and spoke. And so my folks, took me, and we all went to hear him speak. It was in the outdoor football stadium. And when he gave the invitation, my parents kind of leaned over to me and they said, "Well, you want to go down?" And honestly, I had no idea what I was doing, but I was a first child. And, first children, tend to be much more obedient. Deborah was a baby. She was the baby of the family, so she was exactly the opposite. But when they said, "Do you want to go down?" I just, well, that's what they want me to do. So I went down, and later on, when I was back, at the church, my pastor, her dad, had a little talk with me, and obviously having had the opportunity to grow up in church, I knew all of the right things to say when he was asking me the questions about whether or not I had been saved or not, and so I ended up getting baptized and still were faithful in church. But honestly, I didn't know what I had been doing. And but I didn't even know I didn't know. You know, that's just the environment I grew up in. That's just, you know, I went to church and our family was Christian. I was a Christian, and that, you know, that's kind of the sense that I had. But when I was 14 years old, no, I wasn't 14. I was 16 years old, and I had a little incident where I was dating a girl, and I took her home. She lived a little bit out of town, and I was a little bit late myself getting home. And I didn't want to get in trouble, so I sort of exceeded the speed limit a little bit when I was driving home. And unfortunately for me, or maybe fortunately in the long run, I got pulled over by a highway patrolman. Now, that is the worst thing that had ever happened to me in my life. And I was just petrified. And he gave me a ticket, and I went home and told my parents, and they were, you know, they saw how distraught I was, and they were just very understanding and very kind. But I just went straight to bed. And I went straight to bed, and I was just laying in bed crying my eyes out. And it was just one of the most amazing things that happened at that point, because I wasn't even thinking about God, but all of a sudden I just cried out, "God, help me." And I experienced the presence of God in a way that I had never experienced before. And it was at that moment that I had opened, without even realizing what I'd done, I opened my life to Jesus Christ. And from that point on, had the opportunity to get involved with some high school Christian groups that helped me to grow. And obviously I still, you know, had my church family. And when I was 17, I sensed the Lord calling me into vocational Christian ministry. And so I went to college, and 2 weeks after I graduated from Florida State University. Got any Knowles here? No. I didn't think so, but hey, yeah, right. 2 weeks after I graduated from Florida State, Deborah and I got married. And she still had 2 years to go, so I worked a couple of years while she finished up. And then we went out to Fort Worth and went to seminary. Came back to Tallahassee after that, and I pastored a church for 2 years. And during that time, the Lord led us to go into international missionary work. And so we went to Japan, and we were there for nearly 12 years. And when the Iron Curtain fell, there was a huge need for experienced missionaries, people that kind of already knew the ropes a little bit, to go into the former Soviet Union, Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union, because there was no missionary infrastructure there, and so they needed some experience. And so they opened it up, and we felt led to do that, and we ended up going to the former Soviet Republic of Latvia, and we were there for 5 years. And so during those two different missionary experiences, we were in two entirely different, not only different cultures, but two entirely different worldview groups, two different people groups that had different worldviews. And so that gave me a lot of personal experience in crossing those worldview barriers. That in the past, that's been kind of just a missionary skill. In America, traditionally, up until more recent times, that hasn't been a real need in America for Christians to be able to cross those worldview barriers, because pretty much everybody, even if they weren't Christians, they were raised in an environment that was based on a biblical worldview. And so you could start talking to somebody about God, and they knew immediately what God you were talking about. Nowadays, you can't really do that. Nowadays, if you go up to somebody and you start talking about God, they're just as likely to say, "I don't even believe in God," or "Which God are you talking about?" And so it dawned on me after we came back to the States that as I interacted with Christians and interacted, with different churches, it dawned on me that the skills that I had to use as a part of my ministry as a missionary were something that now every American needs, because American society has radically changed. It has changed in the sense of having basically been taken over by a naturalistic worldview, and I'll explain what that is in just a little bit more specifically. But not only that, during I think it was starting around the 60s, they opened up immigration in a way that they had never opened it up in America before. And so people from every different culture, every different worldview just started flooding into America. So now our nation has such a pluralistic facade to it, it's pluralistic envelope that we live in, that we need as Christians to know how to do what missionaries have traditionally done. But you know what? That is not the tradition of the Christian church, because we have tended to be in our little enclave, and we come to church and we've got our traditions of how we teach, how we train, and the training basically is how to understand as much as we possibly can about the Christian faith. And where do we learn that? From the Bible, right? And that's pretty much all Christians in America have had to know throughout our history. But with society changing, then all of a sudden we as Christians also needed to adapt not our message, but our methodology. How do we reach these people that no longer understand who the Christian God is? And so, as I observed this among the Christians I was talking to, as I observed this in different churches that I had the opportunity to speak in, it became very obvious to me that there was a need for this kind of training, this worldview training, this missionary training in our Christian circles. And so when we came back to the States, I was served as an interim pastor for a while. I started a church. I then took another church as a full-time pastor for a time, and then in the process of all that, I began developing the worldview materials, the worldview concepts that I now work with. And so at a certain point, I started, just writing stuff and created myself a little website, and it's a whole lot better now than it used to be. But and I began a ministry called Market Faith Ministries, and it's a worldview discipleship ministry. It's a discipleship ministry to train believers, but specifically with the concept of worldview. And so now I do this kind of thing where I do training on the topic of worldview. Tonight, because it's just kind of a short opportunity for us, I'm gonna explain to you what this idea of worldview is, and kind of give you hopefully a sense of it in a way that you have not known before. But I do this also much deeper. And also, you saw it mentioned the Sunday, I think it was, that I do have this book and some others as well that deal in more depth with this topic of worldview. There's a reason why this concept of worldview is important, adding on to the things that I've just been sharing with you. First of all, having this kind of understanding gives us a type of confidence and a level of understanding about our faith, our own faith, that helps us to be confident not only of what our Christian faith involves, but why it's the truth. And not only that, why other beliefs are not the truth. And so having that kind of understanding gives you a tremendous amount of confidence when you're talking to people that don't come from a biblical worldview. I'm sure all of you know people that are not Christians, that maybe are from other religions, and it can get kind of awkward, can't it, if you don't know what they believe, and if you don't have a real strong sense of why your own faith is true, especially when you get some of these antagonistic people, right? I mean, they get in your face and they start telling you, all the reasons why Christianity can't be true and all this. But if you know this kind of worldview knowledge, it's like, hey, not a problem. How about you? Can you tell me why what you're saying is true? And all of a sudden, you put them kind of on a back foot, and gives you that why. It also gives us a greater understanding of the society that we live in. We live in a society where we are immersed in belief systems that are contrary and often anti-Christian. And if we don't understand the society that we live in, it's very difficult to be able to share a witness, right? And so it gives us an understanding of modern society. It also gives us the ability to effectively share a witness. When we know what we believe and why we believe it, when we know what other people believe and the weaknesses of their beliefs, then we have just a tremendous amount of understanding about how to effectively share a witness. You can't do it exactly the way to an atheist as you do to somebody that's, say, a Hindu, or somebody that is a Wiccan, or somebody that is a Jehovah's Witness. You have to approach them differently so that they can understand what you're talking about. Because when you share the gospel with them, how are they interpreting it? They're interpreting it based on their own understanding of God. And if it's not the same understanding that you are trying to convey as a Christian, then they're hearing your words and they're filtering your words in a way that makes them not be able to truly understand the message that you're saying. So it gives us the ability to share a witness. And then right along with that, it helps us to know how to interact with people of other faiths. Just to share one little thing with you, in this particular book, there's an appendix, a pretty sizable appendix in the back of it that has a short rundown of a whole bunch of different belief systems, so that you can have an understanding of maybe some of the different people that you might personally interact with, and how to reach across the worldview barrier to where they are, so that when you share the gospel, you're sharing it specifically in a way that they will understand. Well, let's start out with a little bit of a definition, okay? What is a worldview in the first place? Well, here's the formal definition. A worldview is the assumptions people make about the nature of reality. Now, does that sound too academic? Does that sound a little esoteric? Well, it can sound that way when you say the assumptions people make about the nature of reality, but it's actually not that difficult at all. If you kind of break it down a little bit, there's a couple of phrases in here, a word and a phrase that help us to break down exactly what we're talking about. First of all, a worldview is a set of assumptions. Now, what is an assumption? An assumption, all it is a belief, right? But it's a belief that seems so obvious that it's hard to imagine how anybody could believe something else. That's an assumption, right? And so your worldview or anybody else's worldview is actually a set of beliefs. It's a belief that just seems so obvious that it's hard to believe that anybody could believe something else. The other part of the definition has to do with the nature of reality. Now, what is reality? Reality represents the way things actually are, the way existence is actually structured. And it's structured in a particular way, and it's not structured in any other way, right? But here's the deal. Different people actually believe that reality is structured in ways that you don't believe. And so putting that all together, a worldview is a set of beliefs about how the totality of reality is structured that seems so obvious, it's just very difficult to imagine that anybody could believe differently. Sadly, they do. So how do we get at this idea of worldview? Well, we're not the only ones that have a worldview. We have a worldview, specifically a biblical worldview. But everybody else has a worldview as well that's based on their own particular set of assumptions. And so one of the really neat things about understanding this worldview concept is that we have here a set of 3 questions that if you can find out the answer to those 3 questions based on whatever belief system's out there, whether it's our Christian faith, whether it's Hindus, whether it's Wiccans, whether it's an atheist, doesn't matter. If you can answer these 3 questions based on what they believe is their authority source, then you have the core of their worldview. And so what are the 3 questions? First one is, who is God? Now, understand that there are belief systems and there's worldview systems that don't believe that there is a God, right? So we've got another way of asking this question that's a little bit more generic, but it's basically the same question. What is the nature of ultimate reality? Okay, so you can ask, if you went up to an atheist and you said, who is God? Then they're just going to tell you, I don't believe in God. But if you go up and you ask them, well, what's the nature of ultimate reality? That tells you what they believe about God. Okay? And you can do that with any belief system out there. The second question is, what is a human being? What is man? And so that one's pretty easy, I think. Determine what their belief teaches about what is a human being. The third question is, when we ask this question in Christian circles, we can say, what is salvation? But the generic way to ask that question is, what is the ultimate that a person can get out of this life? So we have these 3 questions. And so if you want to find out what a Christian believes, then, and our authority source is the Bible, you ask these 3 questions and see what the Bible teaches about that. If you want to find out what an atheist worldview, the core of their worldview is, then you ask them these 3 questions and get their answer, or a Wiccan or whatever. And you see what happens here? You can actually get the answers, and you can put it side by side with how a Christian answers it, and you can see where the gap is. What's the difference in what they believe and what we believe? And so you're able to compare and contrast. And so this is the essential core. If you don't remember anything, I want you to remember everything. But if you don't remember anything else, remember these 3 questions, okay? Because this is how you are going to understand what other people believe, and ultimately how you get down to the core of what you believe as a Christian. As you read the Bible, read it with these questions in mind and see what the Bible says about these, and you will get the core of a biblical worldview. Now, I mentioned that there are a number of different ways that people think about this idea of worldview. And so sometimes when you hear somebody talk about worldview, the thing that you run up against is you might not be talking about the same thing that they are. And so, or when you read it and you read somebody else's, they don't seem to quite jive, and it's hard to, think of it, because people tend to, it's a word that almost seems to self-define, right? A worldview, well, it's how people view the world. But specifically, you need to kind of get down to cases. And so there are actually different Christian groups, Christian ministries even, that define the word in different ways. And so you need to understand what they're talking about. Probe Ministries is a ministry that does training for mostly young people. They'll have camps and different things like that, and young people will go to it and they'll get this training. Probe Ministries actually takes a set number of different belief systems, and they teach around those particular belief systems. And that is their universe of worldview. They believe that there's Christianity, there's Islam. They call Islam a worldview. Secular humanism, Marxism, cosmic humanism, and postmodernism. And so that's how they organize their understanding of worldview. The problem is, and you're going to see this in a few minutes, they're mixing up categories here. And so it makes it a little bit more difficult to understand. It's not bad, it's not like wrong, but it's not complete. But if you hear people that are, probe ministry graduates or whatever talk about worldview, this is how they're conceiving of it. Then you've got another organization called Renew a Nation. This is a group that primarily works with like Christian schools, and they have a curriculum, and they put it in Christian schools to teach a biblical worldview. So in their understanding of worldview, they're not talking about worldview in general. They're talking specifically about a biblical worldview. And so some people that use the word worldview, that's all they're talking about. They're just talking about just Christianity. Answers in Genesis. Anybody know who that is? Answers in Genesis. There's a few people. Answers in Genesis is they have a ministry that deals with, they focus on the first few chapters of Genesis and talk about how that's how Genesis actually is actual history, and it's not just some kind of metaphor. And they're also the ministry, the group that has Noah's Ark up in North Carolina. I think it's North Carolina, isn't it? And so their approach to worldview, they say there's two worldviews. There's God's way and man's way. That's a pretty simple way to break it up. The only problem with that, I mean, it's not bad and it's not wrong, but the only problem with that is when you talk about God's way, that's biblical theism, that's Christianity. But when you talk about man's way, you're talking about everything else, and there's no way to really kind of understand and compare and contrast the different kind of beliefs that are out there. And so, but that's another way that worldview is spoken of. RZIM is a ministry that has 4 worldview categories, and they ask 4 questions related to these 4 categories that you see listed up here. And that is a really good way to do it because you're asking the same those 4 questions. You see that's different from the 3 questions that I gave you, but it's similar, and it's still a very good way. But you're able to ask those 4 questions to any belief system out there, and so there is a way to compare and contrast. So if you ever talk to people that have come through the RZIM training, then this is what they're talking about. James Sire was kind of the godfather or the grandfather, I guess, of worldview training. The guy he's one of these brilliant, genius philosophers. And if you ever read his book, he had a book, his main one was The Universe Next Door. And it deals with worldview, but he's like up here intellectually. And if you try to read his book, I mean, you're just going to be like word by word trying to figure out what he's saying. But I did that. I did that for you. And so he came up with 7 worldview questions. And so you can do the same thing where you can ask those questions about any belief system, and you have a way of comparing, contrasting. But I felt like, okay, that's still kind of complex. So after a lot of work and a lot of study, I pulled it together. I combined questions and got it down to the three: the who is God, what is man, what is salvation. So that's different ways that people treat the word worldview. So when you hear somebody talking about worldview, you now know, okay, I need to see who it is that is making this definition and how they're defining it, so that I won't mix up what this group's saying with what this group's saying, or get confused because they're different. Okay? So there are some basic principles that go into this idea of worldview, and I want you to just to kind of grasp these basic principles. First of all, worldview beliefs are used to distinguish reality from fantasy. Remember the definition? The assumptions people make about what? The nature of reality. So if you have a particular understanding of how reality is structured, anything else is what? It's fantasy. So if you're talking to somebody that's an atheist, and they're telling you about how they don't believe in God and the things that they do believe, you're looking at them and saying what? That's just not real. It's not true. And guess what? They're looking back at you when you're talking about Christianity, and they're saying, that's just not real. That's not true. Because we've got different ways that we understand how reality is structured. Just as an example, the Christianity versus atheist example is probably just a good one to use, but you can use it for any of them. We believe that God exists. They believe God does not exist. That's entirely different understandings of reality, right? And they also have different understandings about what is a human being and what is the ultimate that a person can get out of this life, what is salvation in their eyes. And so worldview beliefs are used to distinguish reality from fantasy. And so every person you ever will talk to in your whole life, no matter who it is, has a way that they understand how reality is structured. And everything except for that is fantasy for them. Okay? Another principle is every worldview is based on faith. Now, particularly naturalists, the people that believe that the natural universe operating by natural laws is all that exists, those people believe that their beliefs are based on science. They are not. Every single belief system that exists in the world is based on faith. Now, the fact that it's based on faith doesn't mean it's not real. It just means that you can't go into a science lab and do an experiment and figure out how reality is structured. When you answer those three questions, you can't answer them based on any kind of empirical anything. Okay? So every worldview is based on faith. Another principle, every worldview understands reality uniquely. That means every one has its own way of understanding reality, and they do not mix. And one other worldview principle is every worldview fundamentally contradicts every other worldview. God cannot exist and not exist at the same time, right? Human beings can't be persons created in the image of God and naturally evolved animal creatures at the same time. And every worldview has its own unique way of identifying reality based on who is God, what is man, what is salvation. And all of the worldview categories contradict one another. They do not mix. One other thing that's really helpful to know is, where does a worldview come from? Where does a person get their worldview? Well, there's three places. What? How's that keep on happening? When you are born and you are raised in a particular environment, and whatever environment that is, the beliefs that are associated with that environment, with the people who raised you, their beliefs become your beliefs. And you don't question it. It's just the way things are. You don't know any different. And so the first source is your circumstances that you were raised in. The second source is what I call confrontation. I remember when I was in high school, I took, for one of my classes, a biology class. Now, I told you I was raised in a Christian home, and a biblical worldview is really what I was immersed in my whole life. But at some point in that biology class, we came to the chapter on evolution. And there it was, right in the textbook, written by scientists, that evolution was true. Naturalistic evolution was true. And my teacher was telling me, my personal authority source in the class was teaching me that naturalistic evolution was true. Well, I always believed in God. And that totally and completely contradicted what I understood, my understanding of reality. And I'm telling you, it shook me up. It shook me up. I didn't know how to deal with that. I did not have any training or categories even in my mind to how to reconcile that. And so, I was one that, it disturbed me so much. I just started digging and learning and finally came out on the other side understanding. I wish I'd have known the worldview approach to doing it then, but I came to a personal understanding of the reality of the God of the Bible. But guess what? There were a lot of other students that were kind of in the same boat I was that ended up going the other way. So that confrontation of worldviews creates such dissonance in some people's lives, and all of a sudden, this new one that they hear, since they can't reconcile it to their old one, sounds more reasonable. And through that confrontation, a lot of people ditch their Christian faith and go in a different direction. A third possibility is one that very, very few people ever have the ability to take advantage of, and that is to make a choice. Because in order to make a choice, what do you have to have? You have to have an understanding, right, of all of the possibilities. And then you can evaluate, how does this one evaluate, and how does this one and this one? And so when you study the topic of worldview, then you have an opportunity to compare and contrast and understand why something is true and something else is not. And so, by the way, just to kind of close the loop a little bit on this confrontation thing, people that are not Christians and at some point God gets a hold of their life, or somebody witnesses to them and that just rings true to them and they become a Christian, what has happened? Their worldview has come into a confrontation with a biblical worldview and they become Christians. So it can work both ways. But so that's kind of where worldviews tend to come from. People that you know people probably that for some reason they ditch their Christian faith. A lot of young people. We were talking about this on coming up here about how so many young people, when they leave home or they leave the church, they graduate from high school and they get out on their own. It's up to around 90% of young people leave their faith. And that's because they've confronted other worldview beliefs, not necessarily intellectually. It could be, emotionally or, in the environment that they go to in college or whatever groups that they end up being a part of. Generically, I talk about faith systems, okay? But there's two kinds of faith systems. There's worldview systems and belief systems. And A worldview system is what we've been talking about before, the assumptions people make about the nature of reality. It represents a very broad set of beliefs that define a particular worldview category. And there are only 4 worldview categories. Now, this is going to be very important in just a few minutes. Only 4. If there's only 4, that's pretty easy to grasp, right? You can figure out and understand 4 different categories. The other category of faith system is called a belief system, and this is represented by every single religion, cult, and philosophy that exists in the world. Now, an assumption, talking about worldview beliefs here, an assumption is not really consciously thought about so much, right? I mean, it's just something that you just know somehow that it's right. And so worldview systems tend to be very unconscious. But people's belief systems, that's what everybody's conscious of. I know that I'm a Christian. That person knows that they're a Buddhist. That person knows that they're a Wiccan. That person knows that they're an atheist. And this is the one, it's belief systems that people talk about. Belief systems are piled on top of a particular worldview system, okay? And there are scores and scores and scores of those. And so here's how you can think of it. Think of it like an iceberg. Down 90% of an iceberg is underwater. I think I must be stuck or something. 90% of an iceberg is underwater, and you only see the top little bit. Well, the bottom part that's underwater, the assumptions part, is the worldview system. And on top of the worldview system is a belief system. But there are numerous belief systems associated with each worldview system. So you've got a worldview system, and then you've got this belief system, this belief system, this belief system, this belief system. And each of the belief systems, they have their own unique properties and qualities, but each one of them answer the 3 worldview questions in the exact same way as their worldview host. How about that? So if you can understand what worldview a belief system sits on, you know what how they answer those 3 questions. So here are the 4 worldview categories. Now you're looking at that and you're saying, there's 5. There's only 4 worldview categories, but there is another category that's called hybrids. And we'll talk about hybrids in a minute, but I want you to look just real briefly at the 4 worldview categories. The first one is naturalism. Naturalism is the belief that the natural universe operating by natural laws is all that exists. And you can quit that. And so it's represented by that circle. That's the whole thing. That's all of reality, just, the natural universe. And so you can see the little foundation with the things sticking up out of it. Naturalism is the worldview category. And then you've got such belief systems in naturalism as atheism, Marxism, postmodernism, secular humanism. There's just a whole slew of them, okay? All of those belief systems answer the 3 worldview questions the same way as the worldview foundation. They just have other things that distinguish them, but their essential beliefs are all based on the naturalistic worldview. And I already shared with you the basic premise. Obviously, since the natural universe operating by natural laws is all that exists, they don't believe that there is such a thing as God. There's nothing outside of the material universe, and their authority source is human reason. There is no other possibility. People have to kind of figure it out for themselves. So that's naturalism. The second worldview category is called animism. Animism is kind of the belief. You see the square, or the rectangle, and it's got in animistic belief, there's a material world and a natural world and a spirit world. And they're both part of the same reality, but they're divided. But at the same time, they interact with each other in a symbiotic relationship. What happens in the material world affects the spirits in the spirit world, and what happens in the spirit world with the spirits affects what happens in the material world. And some of the different belief systems that are associated with animism are such things as Japanese Shinto, Voodoo and Santeria, astrology, Native American religions, Wicca. I mean, there's just a whole slew of different belief systems that sit on this animistic worldview foundation. And all of the belief systems have the answer the three worldview questions the same way as its worldview host. The basic premise is that there exist spirit beings and material beings, and they interact with each other in a symbiotic relationship. What affects one, or what one side does, affects the other side. They believe that there are many gods and spirits, mostly that inhabit spirits that inhabit nature. They believe that there are spirits that inhabit material objects, heavenly objects. They believe that that spirits inhabit different animals. And when a person dies, they go and reside then in the spirit world. And their authority source is history and tradition. So their beliefs are passed down through generations usually by oral tradition, based on what the ancestors figured out and what they taught. The third worldview category is, I call it Far Eastern thought. It's pantheistic monism, if you want to get, philosophical and technical. But Far Eastern thought is the belief that is wrapped around the Far Eastern religions. And so you've got things like Hinduism and Buddhism and Hare Krishna and a number of others that are Far Eastern thought belief systems sitting on this foundation of Far Eastern thought worldview. And the way that works is ultimate reality for them is an impersonal life force. Think of Star Wars and the Force. Okay? So that is reality. That is ultimately reality for them. And ultimate reality is impersonal and it's immaterial. That means that there's no body, and immaterial means that there's nothing material. You think of it as kind of like an energy source of some type. And so that is reality, but parts of that reality have spun off and have gotten far enough away so that it takes on a different character. And what is that different character? The different character is material and personal. That is the material reality that we live in. And so these pieces of the life force then are trying to work their way back to ultimately rejoin the impersonal life force. But in order to do that, they become the animating life of different material creatures or plants and animals. And so one will live its life and it'll die, and the life of that piece of the life force then reincarnates into another one. So this is where reincarnation comes from. And whether it goes forward or backwards or how far forward it goes is based on a principle of karma. And so over thousands and thousands of years, it reincarnates, and the ultimate idea is for it to get to the highest point that it possibly can, the last stop, accumulate good karma, and then when it dies, that life, the life form that life force is in, when it dies, then that piece of the life force then gets to rejoin the main body. That's kind of the sense of how that all works. They believe that since ultimate reality is the life force, then the material reality is illusory. Not illusory in the sense that it doesn't exist, but illusory in the sense that it doesn't exist as ultimate reality. And so the whole idea then is making this distinction between what is ultimate reality and illusory reality. And their authority source is human experience. Then we have theism. Theism is the easiest one for us to understand because our Christian faith is a theistic faith, and the basic premise is that there is a God, a creator God, who created the natural universe and has somehow revealed himself to human beings in that. In some of them, there's a hell. Some of them, there's not. In some of them, human beings can communicate back to God. Some of them, they can't. But the idea is that there is a God who is a creator and created the natural universe. And the idea then is to somehow please the God so that in the end you can go to heaven. And some of the different theistic belief systems include Christianity, Islam, Mormonism, Jehovah's Witnesses, and we go on and on. There's a whole slew of different theistic belief systems. Now, I've told you that there's this other category called hybrid. There is not a hybrid worldview, but there are numerous hybrid belief systems. And the way that hybrid belief systems come into being is they take two or the beliefs, the essential beliefs from two or more worldview categories and try to combine them together into a single religion or a single belief system. Their thought usually is, okay, why can't we all just get along, And so we'll take a little bit of this and take a little bit of that, and we'll put it all together, and then everybody can be happy, right? Well, rather than creating unity, what have they done? They've created more disunity because they've created a whole new belief system out there. And so it might take, one idea from naturalism and another one from theism, or maybe naturalism, Far Eastern thought, and animism, and try to combine them. And what you have with that every time, without exception, you end up with contradictory beliefs that are within the belief system. It can't be any other way because remember when we talked about the nature of worldview, every one contradicts every other one. And so you end up with internal contradictions that cannot be reconciled whatsoever. But human beings have this amazing ability to believe things that are not true. And so we have all these religions that are listed up there and others that are hybrid belief systems. You saw this slide at the beginning, but I wanted to revisit it because I want you to, after having heard what I've shared, to kind of gather it together, and maybe this kind of becomes a little bit more solidified in your mind. Why is worldview knowledge important? Why is it important for us to understand the essential elements of a worldview and what the different worldview categories are? Well, it's important because this kind of personal knowledge gives us the ability to have confidence in our own beliefs. When we look at these different non-biblical belief systems and we answer the three worldview questions and we evaluate, well, can this be true? And we come up with a very solid understanding of not only what these other belief systems are, but why ours is true and others are not true. We get a greater understanding of what modern society is like. All these people that you live around and work around and that people you know, people you grew up with, people that go to different beliefs, different churches or different worship places, you can understand where they're coming from in a way that allows you to be a more effective witness for them. It gives you ability to share a witness more effectively because all of a sudden, what it is that they believe compared to what you believe, and you can see what the gap is. And you can understand and figure out how to bridge that gap and how to interact with people of other faiths. when I do, I have a training that I do. It's called One Day Seminary. It's just a one-day thing, but it covers really all the big topics that you would study if you were in seminary. Obviously, it's like a mile wide and an inch deep, but at least it's a way to put it all together. And we cover things like what is or understand worldview concepts, Christian understanding more deeply, more fully, Christian doctrine, not in the broad sense, but in the essential sense. Missions and evangelism, ethics and morality, Christian apologetics, Christians' devotional life, the study of other religions. And all of this is centered around and is kind of brought together by the fact that you understand the worldview concepts. Because that is the unifying theme that brings all of the diversity of these different topics together. And boy, man, once you get a sense of how that everything fits together, then it's a whole new ball game for you. Just share with you, these are a couple of the books that I have. I showed you this one. I didn't happen to bring the other one, but there is. Mike and I will be at the table back here, and we can talk to you about the books if you're interested in those. And also, I wanted to share with you that my ministry, I have a newsletter. It's a free email newsletter that every week we put out articles that relate to different aspects of worldview. And to get on the newsletter, all you have to do is go to my website, the Market Faith Ministries website, and go down to the place where you can just put in your name and email address, and it'll start coming to you. You don't have to wait till you get home. Even you can pull out your phone and do it just immediately. But it's right there on the home page where you can sign up and just start getting that. And there's tons and tons of articles that we've written that are actually archived on the website as well. Different religions, different worldview categories, different applications of worldview principles related to all the different topics that we've been talking about. It's just tons and tons, nearly 20 years worth of articles. So there's a lot of stuff there. And also, just to share with you, we are on social media as well, and you can see on our website, Facebook, and a number of other things. If you're on any of those and would like to connect with us with that, then we'd be delighted for you to connect with us on that. I've got just a few more minutes before I was told that I have to quit. And so I know I made you kind of drink from a fire hydrant here, but I wanted to give you a chance if any of you have questions that you'd like to ask me about worldview or about just whatever related to the things that we've been sharing tonight. I'd be happy to answer any questions, give you a chance to kind of fill in some gaps that maybe started opening up in your head there. You had a question? Yeah, that's a great question. In one sense, that what you said is true, but at the same time, people, individuals, the beliefs of individuals fall into one of the bigger worldview categories. Okay, so I will tell you this, that for individuals, almost without exception, even people that have been Christians for years and years, because of society we live in, and we're listening to voices from the news and from everywhere else, we absorb all of this stuff, and even as Christians, sometimes we start absorbing beliefs that are not biblical worldview beliefs. One of the great advantages of understanding the worldview concepts is it helps us to be able to kind of sort that out. So in one sense, yeah, everybody does have worldview beliefs, but the particular worldview beliefs that an individual has is still primarily based on one of the four worldview categories. Probably a little bit hybridized, but still, it's not like every single person has an entirely different worldview. I mean, I would say probably pretty much everybody in this room are Christian theists. You know, you believe in a biblical worldview. Your worldview is theism, and it's more specifically Christian theism. And so even if you have other beliefs that kind of deviate from one another a little bit, still your worldview is your Christian theism. Did that answer your question? In one sense, yes. In one sense, yes. I mean, you mentioned, groups like the Boy Scouts, or, I mean, you could talk about, some corporation over here. There are corporations, for instance, that the owner that started or the business was a Christian, and he wanted to build his business based on Christian beliefs, and so he incorporated Christian beliefs into the DNA of his corporation. But when he starts bringing people in, okay, they will, have to adopt or adapt to the corporate culture or the corporate worldview structure, but at the same time, as individuals, that doesn't necessarily mean that they themselves are that. And so, you mentioned Boy Scouts. Its ultimate foundation was a biblical worldview. It is no longer. Boy Scouts have changed radically over the last, couple of decades. And so I would say that their worldview foundation is not what it used to be. But that doesn't necessarily say anything about individuals. But still, there is a way that an organization or a group conceives of reality that is, kind of the guiding principles of it. Is that okay? All right. I don't remember specifically how I answered, but the way I'd answer it now is that the blue side primarily is based on a naturalistic worldview. The belief that the natural universe operating by natural laws is all that exists. There is no God, and if there is no God, there is no source for any kind of objective morality. And so people have to make it up for themselves. And when it comes to group structures, not only do individuals make it up for themselves, but whoever is the one that is strong enough, powerful enough to dominate all the others gets to create for themselves the kind of beliefs that they want to organize morality. And so since the blue side has a naturalistic worldview foundation, then the people who have come to dominate that particular group are the ones who basically decide what is moral and what is not moral, and everybody else has to fall in line. And they can fall in line because they don't have an objective foundation for morality. It is a relativistic one. So they split because it's more individualistic rather than being more corporate based. Right, but it's a lot more difficult for people to when you've got an individualistic foundation. It's a whole lot more difficult to get everybody to agree than it is when you've got a corporate structure where the powerful can come down and kind of enforce their will. And the ones that are being led, I guess, in a sense, don't have to worry too much about what God says because their moral base is relativistic. Okay, it's 8:02. We've got a bunch of questions, and so I'm deferring to the pastor here. What do you want me to do? Exactly. And well, what you have to realize, if you say, okay, the Buddhists are right and the Wiccans are right and the atheists are right, everybody's right, but then how do you reconcile the fact that these different belief systems have beliefs that totally contradict one another? They can't all be true. It's impossible for all of them to be true. It is possible, theoretically, that none of them are true, but it's not. But it is impossible for more than one to be true. Of course, he doesn't, and that is a very common. That's a very common sentiment in modern society. Postmodernism has kind of fostered that idea throughout all of society now. But what you said is your brother. What he is advocating for is completely and totally impossible. It just cannot be, because the different worldviews have entirely different understandings of reality, and reality only exists how reality exists. It's only one way. We might not know what it is, but it's not anything else. Faye. Actually, that's an assaulting, and that's an assaulting the truth mirage is another book that's it's in process, and so when it comes out, you can talk to Mike and Faith, and they'll. But by the way, on the Market Faith Ministries website, there is a whole section where I have done dialogues with, and the dialogues that are in that book actually came out of these, that's on the website, where I have talked to people who are atheists or Baha'i or, all different kinds of religions, And I've had these conversations on social media, and they're there. They're printed there, and you can read them, and you can see how I dealt with people from other faiths. Yeah, exactly. And right. And on top of that, a real interesting thing, to note maybe with your brother. It's one thing to say, well, I believe that this is right, and all these different ones are true and everything. But if you ask him specifically what he believes, he's not going to answer that way. He's going to tell you that he either believes in God or doesn't believe in God, or believes in the force, or something. And you have to, if you want to witness to somebody, at some point you have to get down to the personal level, because that just kind of generic kind of thing is so abstract that it's a really tricky way for somebody to avoid having to face it personally. Well, the truth mirage is the basic, what is worldview? What are the worldview possibilities? Shattering the truth mirage takes the worldview principles, and how do you share the gospel across the worldview barriers? The one that Faith was talking about, assaulting the truth mirage, is basically has to do with a worldview approach to apologetics. Um, uh, in particular, how do you, when somebody comes at you with maybe attacking you for your faith, don't let them just pin your hands up against the wall and take arrows. If they're attacking your faith, then they have their own platform that they are attacking from. Make them justify why their beliefs are true, and why you are obligated to accept their arrows, and make them justify their beliefs. So that assaulting the truth mirage has to do with that one. And there's a couple more that will be coming out later as well. But the different books focus on different aspects of it. The first one in the series is The Truth Mirage, which is the one that deals with the all of the basics. If you're wanting to know how to apply the basics, to share a witness, missions and evangelism, that's this one. That help? And there's other books too besides these two that are on the website. Actually, Mike has the poster back there. It's got a QR code, not PR code, QR code that will take you to actually the Leadership Books website, where all of the different books are posted. So. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, you're kind of moving into one of the applications rather than the worldview beliefs themselves. I assume you're talking about the homosexual. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so what you have there is a way that people are basing their moral beliefs on some worldview foundation. Okay, for the most part, the people that are accepting of that are naturalists. Although there are liberal churches that are all into it as well. Basically, their theology is not biblical theology. It's naturalistic theology using biblical terminology. But based on the worldview, then you have the way that, based on whatever worldview, you have a way that you will understand what's moral and what's not moral. And so the LGBTQ A plus and the rest of the alphabet is not a worldview in and of itself. It's an expression of a worldview. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. It just another little tidbit here, and this is kind of spelled out more fully in this book. What is the gospel message? What is the gospel message? Well, the gospel message, all it is the Bible's answer to those three questions. I don't care. There's a whole bunch of different gospel presentations out there. I mean, different organizations have created different ones, a whole ton of different ones. But every single one of them, they have their own unique way of expressing it. But all they're doing is they're answering those three questions based on what the Bible teaches. That's all the plan of salvation is. And so when you're asking those questions, you're basically getting down to what their worldview is, and then what you want to do in the end, what you want to be able to do in the end is to tell them your answer to the three questions, and that's sharing the gospel, and then invite them to ask Christ in their life. Did that get at it? Mm-hmm. But see, when you're sharing, when you're dealing with this kind of information, I mean, in a big picture sense, it helps us to understand what the categories are. But when you get down to an individual level, you're talking about what do they as an individual believe about God or about reality, and so you can't think in terms of, okay, I'm trying to figure out what their worldview is. I mean, you need to do that. But ultimately, you want to find out what they believe specifically as an individual, because even in the homosexual community, in the transgender community, in whatever community, you're going to have a whole range of different, maybe even different worldviews. Okay, but salvation, Christian salvation, is received at the individual level. And that's the only, when you get down to wanting to deal with somebody's salvation, then you've got to talk to the individual. Mike. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we don't personally save anybody. God's the one that does the saving. We're the messenger. And so there's no need for us to get all, upset ourselves. We can't make the decision for other people. And if you try to live another person's life, all you're going to do is run yourself in the ground. Be the messenger God has sent you to be, and then trust God to work in that person's life. Well, Pastor, I will turn it back over to you. Thank you so much. Okay. Father, I thank you for the opportunity that we have to know you in a personal relationship. And Lord, knowing you is such a wonderful thing, but you have called us to partner with you to share the message of salvation in Christ with a world that is desperately in need. And Lord, you've given us the knowledge, you've given us the tools, you've given us the understanding, and you've given us the personal relationship with you to have something actually to communicate to people. And I just ask that as we personally think about how we want to be submissive to you and allow you to work through our lives, that we would begin to be aware of those who are around us and take advantage of the opportunities that you place before us, and to be truly excited about sharing the gospel with this terribly lost world that we live in. Lord, we have such an opportunity, and I just ask that you would use